Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. The author of Over Deliver, Over Delivered. The second thing is that you really just broke down the business model. And not just the business model, but over time. You're right down to price points, volume, everything, which for the right kind of person who's listening in is already going to be deeply valuable. They're the kind of people who listen to this podcast and they furiously take notes, either on paper or digital paper. And those kinds of folks will love everything that you just shared. The other thing that I think will stand out to folks is the why behind you doing it. And you didn't quite say it on the recording, but we were talking before we hit the record button about just the importance of family to you, and, your daughter becoming engaged, and, trying to, just build a home that's going to allow you to be closer, as a family. And I was curious if you could speak a little bit more around how the education and coaching business fits into your life priorities in general.
I'm glad you mentioned the whole thing about family because, even when I email at least once a week to my list, and I even have a problem calling it my list. And I was a list guy in direct mail. I came out of the list business, at Boardroom. I was the in-house list manager. I was the person that represented our mailing list to the marketplace. And it was a great list, responsive, all of that. And I have trouble with the word list because to me, a list is my online family. And I constantly call it that, even when I'm just mentioning it while I'm writing my blog. So I'm writing my blog and I'm saying, if you're on this list, and then I cross that out and I say, because you're a member of my online family. And so having that embedded in my head makes you realize that a list is people. Lists are people too, right? And having that fundamental as someone, and I'm not bragging here, but, I was mailing, as much as 100 million pieces of direct mail a year at Boardroom in our heyday. And in fact, I probably, if I calculated it, I've mailed in my career over 1.5 billion pieces of direct mail in my career. So it's not, and I'm not bragging when I say that. I'm saying that to someone who's mailed 1.5 billion pieces of direct mail is talking about all of those lists being an online family. It's impractical, clearly. Talk about it that way. But just to mention it that way keeps me grounded in a way that you can't get anywhere else. It's sort of like, the marketers that use terms like tripwires. Now, you don't know, a tripwire is basically a lead magnet. So you have someone, you give them something, they get it, they give you their email address, and then, you sell them a low ticket item or whatever. But the idea of just using that language of a tripwire, I did a blog post. I said, why would you want to blow up your best customers? Was the subject line. A tripwire means you go through a tripwire and they blow up. Well, if they blow up, they're dead and then they can't respond to you. So it's just the logic of it doesn't make sense to me. Just like ninja tactics doesn't make sense to me. A ninja is a mercenary, is a murderer. They sneak around. It's like the worst marketers would be ninjas, right? Samurai is a little more honorable. And I did another blog post called Ninjas versus Samurais. And it just, and you say you can say it's semantics, but if you get used to that language, you'll live into it. You will. I mean, everybody knows that. You start using language loosely and you start talking about your list and your herd. And even Dan Kennedy, he talks about the herd. If you're dealing with your customers as a herd, now he's a great marketer, one of the best of all time. But I think it can make you sloppy. I'm not saying Dan Kennedy is sloppy, but I'm just saying that. So that's a connection of family to my coaching business in a way, so that my online family is one family, my immediate family is another family, my mastermind family is something in between, because my online family I just blog to once a week. My mastermind family is extra special because they're paying me to be part of my family, the blog is free. They're paying me something. That's one reason. But the other reason is that I like to eat my own dog food. So if I'm gonna look for a Facebook media buyer, I could go to the best one in the world. I know who they are. But I'd rather go to someone in my Titans Accelerator mastermind group, hire them, lower price, maybe lower effectiveness to some degree, but I want to give them the shot because they're part of my online family and they're part of my more immediate online family. So, and with copy, I did an email launch for Titans Accelerator. I found a copywriter inside Titans Accelerator to give that gig to, as opposed to finding the best email copywriter for online launches who I happen to know personally outside of the group. So the idea of melding your life with your business, Marty Edelston, who I mentioned, the founder of Boardroom, I think I mentioned this at Titans of Direct Response. It was definitely mentioned at some point, but on the back of his business card, he has a Zen Buddhist text, and it's on my wall, and if I can read it, I'll read it. This is on the back of his business card. The master in the art of living makes little distinction between his work and his play, his labor and his leisure, his mind and his body, his education and his recreation, his love and his religion. He hardly knows which is which. He simply pursues his vision of excellence in whatever he does, leading others to decide whether he is working or playing. To him, he is always doing both. You opened this up to me with that question, but it really is about both. And one more quick thing, and then I see you have another question, so I don't want to. I do monopolize podcasts, so I apologize. But the other thing I would add is that the idea of my coaching and what I do, and the whole thing I talked about not being a consultant, being a coach and an educator, is so meaningful to me. And that when I had the stroke the day before my book launched, and I woke up in the hospital the next day or 2 days later, and I realized I was alive. My limbs were working where they weren't working when I went down. I was obviously blessed and grateful. And I thought about, what would my footprint have been had I died? And you could easily say it would be my book. My book will live on. But it wasn't the book. It was actually the site where I sell my book. I sell it on Amazon, but I have a site, overdeliverbook.com, where you go to that site and it's like all of these amazing bonuses. I have videos from the Titans of Direct Response, from Joe Sugarman and Greg Renker and I think Dan Kennedy. But I took 6 of the 12 presentations from Titans of Direct Response, put them on that site because they're all mentors of mine. Then Dan Kennedy, I have a swipe file from Dan Kennedy, another mentor of mine. I have a live event I did with Perry Marshall, another mentor of mine. I have 19 keynote presentations from Jay Abraham, another mentor of mine and a mentor of yours. So that was my footprint, because the site, overdeliverbook.com, was basically honoring my mentors, both alive and dead, who I stand on the shoulders of, which I mentioned earlier. And that is my footprint. And that was what I came to, and I've written about it in my blog. If you go to briankurtz.net/blog, I have, 8 years of blogs there, and just go in there and put in the search bar, the view from below ground. And that was after my stroke, and how this epiphany came to me of overdeliverbook.com, and how that was, and I don't like to use the word legacy because legacy means you're dead. It's a living legacy to my mentors. And I'm not just saying that to be humble and to be self-effacing. I'm doing it because that's how I work. That's what makes me tick. And that's, going back to your question, that's why I'm rooted in family, both immediate, masterminds, online.
I would say what I heard is that it goes deeper than family. If we were to borrow from Tony Robbins' 6 basic human needs, like 2 values that I heard in there that are really important to you. growth, and so continuing to grow, as a person, and then also very heavy on contribution, and so giving back and
contribution's the key word.